Massive protests erupt in France. Macron comes under heavy attack. Citizens flood the streets opposing the Yadan Law. Greetings to all viewers following the World Perspective News channel. Paris is no longer the calm city of light. The capital of France is shaking under an unprecedented wave of rage as thousands pour into the streets, turning major avenues into frontline battlegrounds directly confronting President Emmanuel Macron's government. Echoing chants, tightly packed banners, and a suffocating atmosphere of tension show that this is no longer an ordinary protest. At the center of the storm is the Yadan Law, a bill now seen as a dangerous threat to freedom of speech, striking at one of the core values of the Republic. Anger accumulated over months has erupted violently, directly targeting the head of state. From streets to lecture halls, from squares to social media, the wave of opposition is spreading at lightning speed, accompanied by serious accusations of suppressing dissenting voices. As security forces begin to appear in large numbers and the first clashes break out, Paris enters a fragile moment. On one side is state power, on the other is a surging mass of public pressure. France is approaching a dangerous crossroads. Paris erupts in rage targeting Emmanuel Macron. Paris is violently shaken. Streets once symbolic of light and civilization have turned into frontline zones of rising anger. Hundreds, then thousands, pour into the streets carrying flags, banners, and months of pent-up frustration. Chants echo through the avenues, reaching the center of political power. The crowd is no longer just opposing a bill, they are directly naming the head of state. The center of the storm is the Yadan Law, viewed as a sharp blade cutting into freedom of speech and pushing society toward a dangerous threshold. Protesters believe it is a step toward controlling opposition voices, especially those related to views on Israel. This anger transforms marches into politically charged waves of resistance. Pressure mounts directly on President Macron, who is accused of steering France into a controversial direction where foreign policy and legislation are increasingly clashing with core Republican values. The situation on the streets is extremely tense. Police deploy heavily, forming barriers and creating a direct standoff with protesters. One wrong move could trigger large-scale chaos. Paris is entering a risky phase where every government decision may add fuel to the fire. This is no longer a temporary reaction, it is a developing national crisis. Universities collapse. Students turn campuses into battlegrounds. At SB University, one of France's oldest academic symbols, a new wave of tension erupts inside lecture halls. Students flood the campus, building barricades, occupying academic spaces, and transforming them into centers of protest. Academic silence is replaced by slogans, debates, and accusations. Hallways and classrooms become hotspots of confrontation. Students openly criticize the education system, accusing it of political entanglement, particularly regarding Israel-related issues. They claim complicity, creating a charged and hostile atmosphere. Student groups organize speeches, discussions, and calls to expand the movement. Their voices reflect determination to break traditional boundaries to defend their views. The occupation lasts for hours, drawing hundreds of participants and rapidly spreading across social media. Images of students filling campuses with banners and chants turn SB University into a symbol of resistance. This is no longer a normal protest, it resembles a coordinated confrontation with clear political messaging. Pressure quickly mounts on university authorities and the government, with security forces preparing to intervene. The university, once a place of knowledge and dialogue, has become a battlefield of power and ideology. Police intervention shocks public opinion. Security forces enter the scene. The atmosphere changes instantly. Police deploy into SB University at the request of administration, forming dense formations with shields and helmets. Within minutes, the campus is surrounded and tightly controlled. Chants are drowned out by boots, commands, and collisions. Protesters are forced back, dragged from occupied positions, and thrown to the ground. Eyewitnesses describe hands being stepped on, heads struck with helmets, and bodies restrained amid chaos. Videos spread rapidly online, becoming evidence of a highly controversial crackdown. The incident quickly escalates beyond the university and spreads across France, reaching the political center where Macron faces mounting pressure. The government defends the operation as necessary to restore order and protect public safety. However, protesters and rights groups accuse authorities of excessive force and political repression. France becomes deeply divided between order and freedom, control and expression. The Yadan Law, a double-edged sword between freedom and control. The Yadan Law becomes the focal point of national controversy. It is seen as a direct intervention into freedom of expression. Protest groups and students react strongly, claiming it could criminalize political opinions, especially those related to Israel. The government defends the law, arguing it aims to prevent extremism, control hate speech, and maintain stability amid global tensions. However, critics raise fundamental questions. Who defines extremism? Who decides what is legal speech? Where does enforcement power end? The fear of misuse spreads. A political statement could be reinterpreted as illegal behavior. A personal opinion could be labeled dangerous. As protests cite real-world examples, a climate of self-censorship emerges, shrinking public debate. The Yadan Law thus becomes a symbolic double-edged sword, balancing security and freedom. Its conflict exposes the fragile foundation of the Republic's core values. International pressure. The US and UN enter the debate. The controversy spreads beyond France at lightning speed. Washington and global institutions begin warning about the consequences of restricting free speech. Many argue that limiting expression could trigger backlash and fuel extremism across Europe. US commentary is direct. A strong democracy must withstand opposing views. When governments control political content, instability rises. UN-linked human rights voices are repeatedly cited by protesters as international validation of their concerns. The movement gains global resonance, turning domestic unrest into an international debate. France now faces dual pressure, internal protests and external scrutiny. Every move by Macron is analyzed globally, limiting political flexibility and increasing risks of miscalculation. The Yadan Law evolves from a domestic bill into an international flashpoint. French society splits into two opposing worlds. France enters a phase of deep internal division. One side believes they are defending freedom of expression and political rights. The other supports government control to preserve order and prevent extremism. Online and offline debates turn increasingly hostile. Trust between social groups erodes. The conflict centers on power versus freedom. Protesters see restrictions as dangerous regression. Government supporters see them as necessary protection. The gap widens daily. Institutions struggle to act as mediators. France is stretched to its limits. A small incident could now trigger national escalation. A historic crossroads. Macron faces a political gamble. All pressure converges on one point: President Macron's decision. The Yadan Law becomes a test of authority. If he pushes forward, protests may escalate further, with increasing clashes and instability. If he steps back, his political credibility could be weakened. Macron stands at the center of a political storm. His opponents are no longer just political parties, they are the streets themselves. A single decision may reshape France's political trajectory. Ukraine war escalation. Russia launches massive strikes. Between 15 to 16, the battlefield in Ukraine erupts in one of the most intense escalations of the year. Russia intercepts 207 Ukrainian drones across Crimea and Krasnodar. Immediately after, it launches a large-scale counterattack using Kh-101 cruise missiles with 800 kilograms warheads. Strikes hit Kyiv, Kharkiv, Dnipro, and Odessa. Massive explosions ripple across multiple regions, overwhelming air defenses. Reports confirm civilian areas are affected, with casualties and infrastructure damage. Signals suggest further escalation, including deployment readiness of advanced missile systems. Oreshnik system and strategic escalation. Military sources indicate possible activation of the Oreshnik system, suggesting deeper strikes targeting Ukrainian logistics and supply chains. This represents multi-layer warfare, combining missile strikes with systemic disruption. Ukraine faces increasing pressure on its rear infrastructure, potentially weakening frontline positions. Economic war. Russia seizes $700 million Western assets. Russia takes control of $700 million in Western-linked assets, targeting companies tied to Poland and the US. This move escalates economic confrontation, freezing operations and transferring control to Moscow. Europe responds with concern as economic retaliation expands beyond sanctions into direct asset control. Energy, supply chains, and shipping may become future pressure points. Middle East tensions. US-Iran confrontation intensifies. Negotiations over Iran's nuclear program reach a critical stage. The U.S. demands a 20-year freeze on enrichment. Iran refuses, insisting on retaining uranium stockpiles. Tensions escalate as Trump signals potential breakthroughs, but ground realities remain volatile with ongoing conflict dynamics. Secret diplomacy collapses. Back-channel negotiations between Israel, Lebanon, Iran, and the U.S. show signs of breakdown. No consensus emerges as demands harden. Military preparations increase, signaling possible escalation if diplomacy fails. U.S. internal crisis. Impeachment wave rises. The U.S. defense leadership faces impeachment attempts over handling of Iran-related operations. Political divisions deepen, with calls even invoking the 25th Amendment. Washington denies political motives, but internal instability grows amid multiple global crises. Global instability. Multiple crises converge. From Ukraine to the Middle East, from Europe to domestic U.S. politics, multiple fronts are heating simultaneously. Economic, military, and political pressures overlap, creating a fragile global system. A small trigger could escalate into a chain reaction. Final warning. The world edges toward loss of control. No side shows willingness to retreat. Russia escalates strikes, the West increases support, and the Middle East remains volatile. Decision-making becomes increasingly risky as global trust erodes. The world is now approaching a multi-front tipping point where one miscalculation could reshape global order. Conclusion. From Paris streets to Ukrainian battlefields, from Tehran to Washington, a single pattern emerges. A world under simultaneous pressure, political, military, and economic, all converging toward a fragile and unpredictable future.